Hello, this is Steve Powers. I'd like to welcome you back. And today I'm going to show you how I painted this rose in gouache. Actually, I painted this in mixed medium, really, because the background is transparent watercolor and the rose itself is in gouache. But I also used graphite to do the layout, and I touched it up with a little bit of detail at the end with colored pencils. And all of which mix quite well together and do a lot of different layers with it. Now, I started with 100-pound bristle smooth paper that I taped down to the board, and I did a wet on wet technique where I, of course, wet the canvas. I get it nice and damp, let it dry a little bit, and get it absorbed into the paper. Let it come back with my transparent watercolor. In this case, I chose Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray has of course, it's a gray tint to it, gray tone, and it's got a blue hue as well to it. So that's a nice contrasting color to the primary orange of the rose. I also did a bit of a dry brush technique in here to give it a little bit of texture to the background and to darken the edges and the corners so it focuses your attention towards the rose itself. Now, gouache is great because I can cover with it. Now, of course, it's water soluble, so I can also pick it out and I can blend it and I can smooth it down and blend it some more with extra water. Um, and I can get variations of hue to the color just by the amount of water that you use. Um, it will obliterate your line work, so I go in there with the lighter colors, get the shapes developed first, is something I recommend. But I know a lot of people that will actually go in here and they won't even have any line work. They'll just have their reference and they just start painting right away. But in this case, I guess I'm not as good as they are. Now, you can see where I go from the green, then I go over to the yellow, then I come back to the green. It's giving your colors some time to dry a little bit. If you want to blend it, you want to keep the it to be moist. Um, so you let it dry a little bit, and you come back and add a little bit more to it, so you get that smooth gradation. But you can also let it dry and layer it with some more colors. And gouache will, as long as you don't use too much water, it'll stay where it is. Of course, like with any watercolor, the more water you use, you can actually, like with even with this red, if I didn't like this, I could go back, wet it, and pick it up with a damp cloth. Or in this case, you'll see me do a few times here. I know I do it a little fast with this time lapse, but you can put some water in there, clean off your brush, and come back with that dry brush and pull um, that pigment back out. Use the brush kind of like a sponge. But if you want to pick up more than that, and than a little area, just use a dry um, paper towel. Always keep some paper towels on hand. It's nice. I do use a cloth towel for the brush. So in this case, I am using the same half-inch brush for the rose itself. I did use a 3/4 angled brush for the background, but this is a half-inch angle that I use for this entire rose. And what I do is I clean it off and I squeeze it through the towel, and then I can change colors without having any color mixing in the brush itself. Um, I have done that before, so you just kind of live with it and you move on. But it's a technique, and you'll get used to it. You'll find ones that work for you, some that you're just not comfortable with, and that's the beauty of art. It's we come up with different techniques and process, and we all do it a little differently. But the goal is still this representation of of reality, impersonate, impression of reality, really, because there's no way I'm going to get every bit of detail into this rose that nature has. The fact is, this is a little, um, it's about the size of my hand, you know. About, I think this canvas is actually on a 8 by 10, but the rose itself is just a portion of that. You can tell, you can see. I don't know the exact dimensions, but um, when you do it small like this, you really have to get those values to develop and form the forms of your subject. And then in this case, you can see where I'm putting in the majority, the base colors, and then I'm coming back and putting the darker colors and blending until I get the right value changes. Something you want to think about um, when it comes to what subject you're painting. You want to see if it's actually, or rather understand um, the physical nature of this rose, say. Um, how it's so tight on the inside, and then as it blossoms, the petals fold out. Well, those folds are on the outside are going to have more transparency than the petals on the inside. The light is going to be blocked out from the density, but as it folds out, now you're going to have the different color variations dependent on the color source. In this case, this is um, taken in sunlight, so you're going to get a little bit of yellow from that sunlight and that transparency. And of course, the physical makeup of the rose itself, the local color, where it's yellow um, towards the bottom of the petals, and as it comes up to the edges, and it turns into an orange, and from the yellow into that yellow orange, and then into that orange red, and then to a very dark orange red around the edging of these petals. Of course, it's a hybrid, and I have no idea how they create them and with the cross pollination and all that, but it's quite stunning transitions. And for an artist, it's a nice practice to go from um, that dark reds into the oranges and into the yellows. But so no matter what you're working on, you should understand the physics of what makes up the object. It helps you with, I think, with the transition. It helps me anyways. Um, so in this case, this right now is primarily noodling it, adding a little bit of brighter color, and with a gouache I can go over what's there, and then dampening it and redefining some of these edges, redefining the shapes with these value changes. You know, value change equals form change. In this case, you don't just have the values, but you also have the hues to deal with when you get away from the um, grayscale and go into adding colors into your artwork. Um, so again, I just keep going in here and adding in a little bit more of this. It's a orange Chinese orange, I believe. So, but it's an orange red gouache, and it's these Holbein uh, gouaches and some student transparent watercolors for the background. But watercolors in general, I mean, yes, there are some that are better than others, and you'll feel which one works better for you. But they all mix quite well together. Um, these Holbeins can be a little bit somewhat expensive, but gouache is actually somewhat hard to get at your Michaels and your Hobby Lobbies and some of the art stores. Um, so I just go to Amazon and I'll get a set, and there are various ones that you can get. Again, you'll find which ones you like. I'll make recommendations, and best is to try a little bit of each and see which ones you like better, which ones last longer, which will give you a better, richer color, more consistent color. And that's the way it is with any artwork. Now, believe it or not, this is compressed. I'm doing this 8 times the speed that I normally that it took to actually do it. Um, so it's You wait for the paper to dry sometimes, and that takes some, of course, takes time. So I think that this whole little painting took a little under 2 hours, and I've compressed it into about 13 minutes of video here. So hopefully it's not going too fast and you actually learn something from it. But it's just these are good studies to do because you really can't um, mess them up too much. It's not like we're doing portraits where it's very unforgiving. Even the untrained eye sees when a portrait isn't done right. When you're doing flowers, there's so many different variations to nature that it's quite forgiving. Here with my colored pencils, I'm just adding another layer of detail, adding in some little things that I could have painted in, but you have more control over the pencils than you do over the brushes, and I'm comfortable with it. But again, that's what works for me. If for you, you might want to go in there with a little brush, and around the edges, I probably could have. The brush would have given me a bit of control, and definitely could have the same color um, matching um, that I was using. The pencils and are close, but they're not quite right. Not just what I was using. Um, but I do have a lot of control over the pencils. I can clean up some of the edges, and it's just something I prefer. So going into here um, with these pencils, you can see how I'm putting a little bit down and then blending it in. Um, I mean, if you haven't used colored pencils before, you can get some really nice gradations with the colored pencils. Normally, you would go light to dark, but in this case, I'm actually using it to add some texture as well as clean up some of these edges. And if you want to clean up a light edge, of course, you do the dark on the other side of it. It's the easiest way to do it. But I started with pencils. I like pencils. I'm comfortable with pencils. Um, I prefer graphite over most things. And you can see you can erase here too. You should really use a kneaded eraser, but as long as you don't do on too much pressure on this paper, it'll hold up quite well. Again, do not erase wet canvases. You will rip through them. Yes, I have done that too. But watercolors, pencils, um, everything I've used here today, it's they're quite forgiving, and again, it allows you to really sculpt the subjects that you're doing, and that's where it's really fun and enjoyable is just to sit here and noodle it a little bit. And again, it's quite forgiving. So here we bring it to an end. So thank you for joining me.